Now that we have looked at the different locators present in Selenium, now I'm going to explain you how you can use XPath to handle dynamic elements. Now there's so many scenarios when you start automating your applications, you'll find elements which are dynamic in nature. So what do I mean by dynamic? That means their attributes and values may keep on changing depending on the operations you are performing on the application, right? So for an example, when you when you click on some button, it displays a success or a failure message on the application, right? But even if you identify that element using some attribute, the text inside that may change depending on whether it is a success or a failure, right? And some attributes may also change. So your scripts will fail if you just handle it in a normal way, just taking some identifier and trying to identify that element, right? So your script may fail for may pass for one scenario, but it may fail for the other scenario. So we are going to look at different ways of how you can use XPath so that you can handle these dynamic elements, right? So these are the 6 methods which I have listed down, uh, using which you can handle dynamic elements. The first one is already we have looked at it, like we will be using the basic XPath, which means you can use the dynamic uh, or the relative XPath for an element, or you can use a static XPath, right? So if you want to see it again, say for example, I pick up the sign in button, right? So I go and copy this XPath, right? And so I'll use it to find the element, right? So by.xpath, and I'll copy this here. So this is the relative XPath, right? And it can actually handle wherever this button is placed. Even if the location of this button changes in the HTML DOM, it is still able to identify this element. So somehow um, XPath, using relative XPath, you can handle some elements which are dynamic in nature, right? Which are changing positions or which have changed the positions in the screen, right? Now you can also use the static XPath, but I would really not recommend it because that's bound to change uh, whenever you are working in any application, right? So looking at the next item, so which is contains method, right? So it's the preferred way of handling web elements. Whenever you observe a certain pattern which is repeating for different attribute values for that web element, right? So if you observe any pattern, any specific pattern which is repeating, you can always use contains, and it has the ability to find the element even if you provide a partial text of that particular value, right? So let's see how we can use this contains method to find an element. Okay, so before that, let me explain you. We are going to look at this particular element, right? So when you click on sign in without entering username password, it gives you an error message. But this is dynamic in nature because when you sign in successfully, it may give you a different message. Or when you sign out of the application, although the element is same, the messages are all different, right? So in real time, you should be able to handle this dynamically, right? Whatever message is there, you should be able to grab it so that you can put some validation here. Okay. So how we can do that? I'm going to show you that. So we'll be capturing the element inside a web element object, right? So let's look at it, and driver dot find element. Then we'll take the XPath. Now here we'll be applying something called contains, right? So contains. Okay. So before that, you need to specify some identifier before that, right? So yeah. So we'll give it any element, any attribute, right? And then we will do contains and then what we'll be taking. So let's inspect this element. As you can see in the class, right, there is a common text which is appearing, which is an alert, right? So as this is an alert message, even if the other attributes are changing, the class should always have a alert. So that's what my assumption is, but obviously you can verify it with your elements for different scenarios, right? You can log into the application and you can check whether the class is changing or not, right? But I'm for this particular demo, I'm just taking it as this is the pattern which will be repeating, right? So I'll use this. So I'll be using class and then I'll give it a value which is alert, right? I will close the braces and that should be it, right? So it should be able to identify this. Now, what I want to do is I want to print the text which is present inside this element, right? So I will use the get text to get the text of this element and I'll print it. So let's check this. So contains method, it's similar to how you write a simple XPath, right? It's only you need to put this contains and then you need to put the identifier and the value of that identifier inside the contains. Okay, sorry. So before that, I just need to click on that button, right? So let me do that so that the error message will appear in the page. So this time it should work. It will click on the button, it will get that error message, it will identify that error message, and it will return us the text which will print on the console. Okay. So let's see this. Yeah, it clicked on the sign in button. The error message has come and it should be able to grab the text now. So let's verify this. As you can see, it has grabbed the complete text here, right? So it's error and then invalid credentials or access not granted. And then it is also grabbing this cross button, which is like a close text. So you can put various validations here, right? You can check whether this text is present in this particular element. And this way you can actually complete your scenario, right? For for an element which is dynamically changing. Now we can do the same thing using, I'll just skip using or and I will come to it later. So let me show you starts with, right? So this is another kind of method through which you can match the starting text of the attribute to find the element whose attribute changes dynamically. So for any dynamic element, you can put some text which is in the beginning of that attribute value, right? So contains was, it will try to find it. You can put text which is present anywhere, but starts with is something which is present in the beginning of the value, right? So it will always it will always check the elements which have that starts with value, right? That value at the beginning of the uh, whatever text is present, right? So that's the difference between contains and starts with. And let's try to use this in this particular scenario, right? So I'll try to use the same element, right? So let's see what's present in this element first so that we can identify. So um, it starts with this alert, right? So we can always take this first first text and we can put it here, right? So starts with this, right? So let's check now whether it is also behaving the same way. So I'm just providing, explaining you how you can do this. Now, depending on the scenario, you need to find out ways to actually use it in your automation, right? At different places. So it should return us the same text, error text, right? Okay, so here is our error text. So now you can see how we performed this operation using two different ways, right? One using contains and one we using starts with, right? Now let's move forward and we'll be looking at the next method, which is using or and, right? So to identify a particular element, it's not necessary you just use a single attribute. You can also use multiple attributes and join it together using or and condition, right? So that way you can actually bring uniqueness to your identifiers or to your elements rather than only using one attribute, which is not enough to make it unique, right? So how we can use this? Okay, so let's pick um, let's pick some other element, right? So right now okay, so let me go to some other page actually. There you can find similar elements and we can use this or and condition, right? So here you can see there are two text boxes, right? First name and last name, and the type is text, right? The class is form control, ID is first name, but the ID will be different here, right? So consider a situation where you don't have an ID for these particular fields or any name or any unique identifier for uh, these two text boxes. You just have a text type as text and some other identifier, right? So how you will go ahead with this scenario? How will you identify this first name uniquely, right? So for this, you can use kind of two attributes. Like in this, we can use the type as text, and then we can also use the ID as first name. So, right? Or we can, yeah, so ID is first name. That's because I don't have a perfect example for this, but I would explain you how it is happening, right? So this is our last name, as you can see. So this is also class form control. And if I give these two attributes, type and class, it will not be able to identify it uniquely. So I need to give some other value here, right? So I would pick ID, but ideally in real world scenario, we will not be having ID, but you can pick some other attribute similarly. So let's use this and we'll see how we can use or and condition here, right? So um, let me do this driver dot find element by dot XPath, right? And then we take this and we will here we will use identifiers. So first one is type, right? So type equals to text, right? And then we'll use here another condition, which is we'll use and, so that we can use another identifier here, and we'll use the ID, which is equals to first name, right? Now, so we'll close this and right, so that's done. So this is how you can use two identifiers using and condition. So whenever it matches element based on these two conditions, it has to be uh, I mean these two attributes have to match. In order to match the element, it needs to perform it needs to have both these conditions as true, right? So that's the meaning of and. Now we want to perform some operation here. So we will just send some keys here or some text, right? So test one, and I need to change this URL. So I want to open this URL, and I want to comment out this and this also. So let's see now. Okay, so it type the test one and the first name text box, right? So this is how you can work with um, and similarly you can do it for or also on the same condition, because we have got a ID, right, which is unique. So even if it doesn't have a type text, if it has an ID, it will still work with this control, with this element, right? So in or condition, it will either, if either of the condition matches, then it will uh, take that element. Okay, so this is how you can use or and condition to have multiple attributes for a element, right? So now we need to look at some other attributes or some other ways. So there is text and there is index, right? So let's look at those. So now, um, so, okay. So we can take this next button, right? Or we can take this sign in link, right? So let's look at it. And yeah, so there is text, right? So let's build our XPath here. And this is our sign in. So we will take the A tag and then text equals to. So this is how you build your XPath for text, right? And you, as you can see, it is uniquely identifying this particular element. So it's pretty useful whenever you don't have any other unique identifier, you can go with text because every element will have a particular text, right? So you can always use this. Now, yeah, so A tag, and then you need to write text like a method, and then you need to pass the value here. Okay. Okay. So I already have that. So sorry. Okay. So this is our XPath, and then we need to click here. Okay. So this is how you use the text method. So we'll execute this and we'll check it out. Okay. So it went to the sign in page. So it's correct, right? Now let's look at our last way of identifying unique elements or dynamic elements is the index, right? So I have an example for index. So how do we do that? Going to tell you. As you can see here, there are two radio buttons, right? For gender. And if you inspect this element, you can notice this is a type radio button. ID is gender, right? Value is M. And for the other, it is also type is radio, ID is gender, right? Name is also gender, only the value is different. So think you don't have a value kind of identified present in these two elements, then how do you identify? Because everything else is same, right? So in these kind of cases, you can use index, right? So I can easily identify this radio buttons using the ID gender, right? But in that case, I'll be having two elements because they are same, right? So I'll be having let me just construct this ID, then I will explain you. So gender, right? Okay. So as you can see, there are two elements because both have the ID gender, right? But I just need uh, my first element. I would just want to click on the male radio button, which is the first element. So in this case, you can use something called index. So surround that and put the index as 1. So it will uniquely identify the first element which matches this attribute or this locator, right? So this is how you can identify unique elements using index, right? When there are no common, when there are no unique attributes present for two elements, you can distinguish between them using index. So by dot xpath, and then you put that xpath here, and I will click on it, right? So let's see. I will execute this. So it should select the gender as male, okay, which is the first index, right? So it is selecting. So similarly, you can select the female radio button using the index 2, right? So it's an easy way of identifying your elements uniquely when you don't find any other identifier, right? So this is all I wanted to show you in this session, where how we can handle dynamic elements using different methods of XPath, right? In the next section, we'll be looking at some of the XPath access, right, which further enhances the ability of XPath to identify your elements. So I'm going to show you how.